The Watergate scandal left a lasting impact on American politics, shaping how citizens view the presidency and the limits of power. Nixon's actions authorizing illegal activities, covering them up, and attempting to manipulate justice showed what can happen when ambition and secrecy override the law. Yet, the fallout also highlighted the strength of democratic institutions. Congress, the courts, and a free press proved capable of holding even the most powerful leader accountable. For Americans, Watergate became a vivid lesson that no one is above the law, and that vigilance is necessary to protect democracy. One of the key lessons is the importance of transparency. The scandal revealed how easily power can be abused when decisions are hidden from public scrutiny. By trying to conceal the truth, Nixon undermined trust in the presidency and the government as a whole. This erosion of trust had long-term consequences, shaping how citizens, media, and politicians approach the office of the president. Even decades later, Watergate serves as a benchmark for ethical behavior in politics, a reminder of the danger of unchecked authority, and the necessity for mechanisms that ensure accountability. Another lasting effect was the reinforcement of investigative journalism as a pillar of democracy. The work of Woodward and Bernstein demonstrated the power of persistent reporting to uncover truth and hold leaders responsible. Their efforts inspired generations of journalists to question authority, dig deeper, and challenge official narratives. Watergate showed that transparency and accountability are not automatic. They require diligence, courage, and a commitment to uncovering facts, even when the stakes are high. For the public, Watergate also served as a lesson in civic responsibility. Citizens were forced to confront uncomfortable truths about leadership, corruption, and the fragility of democratic norms. The scandal illustrated that democracy relies not only on laws and institutions, but also on informed and engaged citizens. By paying attention, questioning authority, and seeking evidence, people can play an active role in ensuring that leaders act ethically and in the nation's best interest. Awareness and scrutiny are essential tools for preserving the balance of power in any democracy. Ultimately, the story of Watergate is more than history. It is a guide for understanding the dynamics of power and accountability. It reminds us that presidential authority comes with limits and responsibilities. When those limits are breached, the consequences can be severe, not just for the leader, but for public trust and the integrity of democratic institutions. Yet, the response to Watergate also offers hope. Laws, courts, journalists, and civic engagement together can restore balance and ensure accountability, even at the highest levels. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, remember that the lessons of Watergate are relevant today. Paying attention, asking questions, and demanding transparency are not just abstract ideals. They are the tools citizens have to protect democracy. Understanding how power can be abused and how accountability functions gives each of us a clearer picture of how government really works. The story of Watergate is a reminder that history matters, scrutiny matters, and the actions of informed citizens matter more than ever. As the Watergate scandal unfolded, it became a story of relentless investigation, determination, and the power of accountability. While the break-in itself may have seemed like a minor crime, the web of secrecy and abuse surrounding it quickly expanded. Investigative journalists played a crucial role in uncovering the truth. Reporters at the Washington Post, most notably Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, connected the dots between the burglars and the White House. Using confidential sources, meticulous research, and unwavering persistence, they revealed a systematic effort by the president and his aides to obstruct justice. Their work showed the public that the scandal wasn't an isolated act of mischief. It was a calculated attempt to manipulate democracy for personal and political gain. Congressional investigations soon followed. Senate hearings brought national attention to Watergate, allowing ordinary Americans to see the depth of the misconduct. Witnesses testified about illegal wiretapping, hush money, and attempts to use federal agencies for political purposes. The hearings were televised, making it impossible for the public to ignore the severity of the scandal. Every revelation raised new questions. How far had the president gone? Who else was involved? Could the system hold the most powerful leader accountable? These questions captured the attention of a nation as Americans watched history unfold before their eyes. One of the most significant moments in unraveling the scandal was the fight over the White House tapes. Nixon had secretly recorded conversations in the Oval Office, and these recordings became critical evidence. For months, Nixon resisted turning them over, citing executive privilege, but the legal battle eventually reached the Supreme Court. The court ruled unanimously that the president was not above the law and had to release the tapes. This ruling was historic, reinforcing the principle that even the highest office is subject to oversight and legal accountability. The tapes revealed that Nixon had not only known about the break-in, but had actively participated in the cover-up, giving clear evidence of obstruction of justice. The release of the tapes changed everything. Once the evidence was irrefutable, political support for Nixon began to collapse. Members of his own party realized that protecting the president was no longer tenable. Key officials resigned or testified against him, and calls for impeachment grew louder. The scandal illustrated the immense consequences of abusing power. It showed that when leaders put personal or political interests above the law, the institutions of democracy and the free press become essential tools to restore accountability. Watergate became not only a story about a president's wrongdoing, but also a story about the resilience of American democracy in the face of corruption. By the summer of 1974, the picture was undeniable. Nixon faced almost certain impeachment and the possibility of criminal charges. The evidence revealed in the investigation and hearings left him with little choice. In a dramatic and unprecedented move, President Richard Nixon resigned from office on August 8, 1974. His resignation was a historic moment, confirming that even the most powerful individual in the country could be held accountable when the law, journalism, and public scrutiny converged. The Watergate scandal remains a cautionary tale, a vivid example of how the abuse of power can unravel even the strongest political position. As the investigation into Watergate unfolded, it became increasingly clear that the scandal was not an isolated event, but a deliberate pattern of misconduct stretching all the way to the White House. One of the most shocking revelations was the role of secrecy and deception. Nixon and his aides attempted to control the narrative, issuing false statements to the public, downplaying the break-in and claiming no connection to the burglars. While the truth was slowly emerging through investigative journalism and congressional inquiries, the president continued to use his power to manipulate the process, creating an atmosphere where it was nearly impossible for ordinary citizens, or even law enforcement, to know the full extent of wrongdoing. The most damning evidence came from the infamous Oval Office recordings. Nixon had a habit of taping conversations in the White House, and these tapes ultimately became the smoking gun that confirmed what many suspected. The president had actively participated in the cover-up. He discussed strategies to obstruct the FBI investigation, encouraged aides to lie, and even suggested using government agencies to intimidate witnesses. This wasn't just political maneuvering. It was a calculated effort to evade justice. The tapes exposed a leader willing to compromise the law and democratic institutions to protect himself and secure his political power. For Americans, the realization was chilling. The president, the person sworn to uphold the Constitution, had used the office to manipulate and deceive. Obstruction of justice was at the heart of what Nixon did wrong. By attempting to interfere with an ongoing investigation, he violated not just legal boundaries, but the ethical expectations of leadership. It wasn't merely a matter of political scandal. It was a direct attack on the principle that no one, not even the president, is above the law. When Nixon authorized payments to the burglars to buy their silence, directed aides to fabricate stories, and pressured officials to impede the investigation. He demonstrated how power can be abused when accountability is absent. These actions created a cascading effect, forcing members of his own administration and Congress to confront an uncomfortable truth about the limits of executive power. As public awareness grew, pressure mounted. Congressional hearings, relentless reporting by journalists, and mounting evidence from the tapes began to erode support for the president. Nixon faced an unprecedented crisis of legitimacy. Even members in his own party began to distance themselves as the implications became clear. Watergate was not just a political misstep. It was a constitutional crisis. The nation watched closely as the mechanisms of accountability investigations, subpoenas, and eventually the threat of impeachment tested the resilience of American democracy. It was a real-time lesson in how a president can overstep boundaries and how institutions respond when that happens. Ultimately, Watergate was a story of cause and effect. A seemingly small crime, a break-in revealed a much larger pattern of abuse, secrecy, and obstruction. Nixon's wrongdoing was not just in authorizing illegal activities, but in attempting to hide them, leveraging his position to manipulate justice and public perception. The scandal forced Americans to confront an uncomfortable truth. The highest office in the country could be misused, and the public needed vigilance, transparency, and a free press to hold leaders. Imagine a president so powerful that he seemed untouchable, yet behind closed doors, he and his team were committing actions that would shock the nation and forever change the way Americans viewed the presidency. This is the story of Watergate, one of the most infamous political scandals in U.S. history. Most people know it involved break-ins, tapes, and a resignation, but few truly understand exactly what went wrong, what the president did, and why it mattered so deeply. At its core, Watergate is a story about power, secrecy, and the consequences of trying to manipulate democracy itself. It all began with a break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. on June 17, 1972. 5 men were caught attempting to wiretap phones and steal documents. But the scandal extended far beyond these burglars. The real issue was the connection to the White House and the effort to hide the truth. These men were not acting alone. They were linked to a network of political operatives working for the re-election campaign of President Richard Nixon. This was no ordinary crime. It was an attempt to spy on political opponents to gain an unfair advantage in an election. That in itself was illegal, but the actions that followed revealed an even deeper abuse of power. Once the break-in was discovered, the president and his aides faced a choice: take responsibility, investigate, or cover it up. They chose the last. Nixon and his team engaged in a series of efforts to obstruct justice. They tried to use the CIA to interfere with the FBI investigation, offered hush money to the burglars, and encouraged witnesses to lie under oath. Every step of the way, the White House attempted to manipulate law enforcement and the judicial system to protect the president and his campaign. This pattern of obstruction is what truly set Watergate apart. It was not just a political misstep. It was a systematic attempt to break the law and shield those at the highest levels of government from accountability. The scandal deepened when journalists and investigators began connecting the dots. Reports from the Washington Post, led by Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, revealed that the break-in was only the tip of the iceberg. Secret recordings of conversations in the Oval Office, later known as the Nixon tapes, exposed the president's direct involvement in planning, approving, and covering up illegal activities. These tapes provided undeniable evidence that Nixon was not just a passive observer, but an active participant in obstructing justice, using the power of his office to manipulate the law for personal and political gain. The public realized that their trust in the highest office of the land had been profoundly betrayed. Watergate wasn't only about a break-in. It was about the abuse of power at the very top. Nixon's actions violated the principles of democracy, rule of law, and accountability. By using the presidency as a tool for personal and political advantage, he crossed lines that no leader should, setting a dangerous precedent if left unchecked. Citizens watched as the scandal unfolded, learning that even the most powerful leader is not above the law, a lesson that continues to resonate today.